I borrow your pen for my final exam?" the poor girl asked, her voice trembling, unaware he was a CEO millionaire, unaware the man she stopped on rainy Eastwood Avenue had the power to rewrite destinies. She clutched her worn-out sneakers, her thin jacket soaking through as the storm swallowed her silhouette. But the CEO millionaire before her looked at her with the quiet, unsettling intensity of someone who already knew she was fighting a battle far bigger than a missing pen. She thought she was simply asking for help, but he saw something she didn't yet see in herself. Resilience, hunger, grit. She just needed a pen. But why did his eyes soften like he'd been waiting to meet her? She was just a poor girl. But why did he hesitate? Studying her like her entire story mattered. She thought she was invisible. But what he did next would shock everyone. Who was he really beneath that tailored suit? Why did their worlds collide on a rainy street moments before her final exam? And what hidden door was about to open because a poor girl dared to ask a CEO millionaire for a simple pen? Rainstorm water rushed along the gutters of Eastwood Avenue, turning the cracked pavement into a shimmering river that reflected neon lights and passing headlights. The cold bit into her skin, but Leah Dawson kept walking fast, hugging her thin jacket to her chest, her breath fogging in front of her like little fragments of desperation. Today of all days, her pen had died. Today, the morning of her final exam. Today, when she needed everything to go right. Her worn-out sneakers slapped the ground, fully soaked, squishing with each step. She hated how loud they sounded. She hated how visible poverty could make someone feel. Her fingers shook as she searched her backpack again, hoping by some miracle the pen would reappear. It didn't. All she found were scribbled notes she'd written during late nights in the library, nights when she studied with borrowed books because she could never afford her own. She didn't want to borrow anything today. Not again. Not from classmates who'd look at her with pity. Not from professors who'd raise brows at her thrifted clothes. Not from anyone who already saw her as less. But the exam hall was still 3 blocks away, and without a pen, she felt her chest tighten. She thought of calling her mother, but she knew better. Her mother had already done too much. 3 jobs, sleepless nights, skipped meals. Asking her for 30 cents for a pen felt like asking her to bleed again. As she crossed the street, she spotted him, a man in a tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, polished shoes so shiny they reflected raindrops like tiny stars. He stood beneath a dim streetlight, checking his watch, his posture straight, calm, and unbothered by the storm like the world bent itself to accommodate him. He looked powerful, the kind of man who had never needed to run for a bus or choose between paying rent and buying food, the kind who didn't worry about pens. Her heart thudded painfully. She shouldn't ask him. People like him didn't talk to girls like her. But desperation overrides pride. She swallowed hard, stepped forward, and forced her weak voice out before she could change her mind. "Excuse me, sir. Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" He didn't respond at first. His gaze lifted from his watch, landing on her like a slow, deliberate scan. His eyes were dark, intense, the kind of eyes that could see through stories people tried to hide. "A pen?" he repeated, like the request was both simple and strangely important. She nodded, embarrassed, hugging her soaked backpack. Mine stopped working, and I need to get to campus." He studied her face, then her sneakers, then the fraying sleeve of her jacket, then her trembling hands. She felt exposed, like he could read every sleepless night, every meal she skipped, every humiliation. Swallowed. "Why didn't you ask someone else?" he asked quietly. Her throat tightened. "Because I didn't want them to look at me the way people usually look at me." "And how do people look at you?" he pressed. "Like I don't belong," she whispered. For a moment, the storm faded. The sound of rain became distant, replaced by the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. He blinked slowly, like her answer hit a place inside him she hadn't meant to touch. Then he did something she never expected. He crouched down, a powerful man lowering himself on a dirty, rainy street, and untied his polished designer shoes. Carefully, thoughtfully, he set them right beside her soaked sneakers. Her eyes widened. What are you doing?" He stood, rain dripping from his hair, his voice low and steady. "The pen isn't the real problem," he said. "Walk into your final exam wearing these shoes." She stared at him like he'd spoken another language. "What?" "No, I can't. I just asked for a pen, and I'm giving you something better." His tone left no room for argument. "These shoes won't carry your story. You will." Her breath caught in her chest. Rain slid down her cheeks, mixing with tears she didn't realize she'd let slip. "But why?" He gave her a faint, unreadable smile. "Because sometimes, the smallest request reveals the biggest truth." She didn't understand, but something in his voice, something warm, something knowing wrapped around her like a fragile kind of safety she hadn't felt in years. "Go," he said gently. "Don't be late." She slipped into the shoes. They were warm, solid, powerful. They felt like they belonged to another world, a world she had never imagined herself stepping into. As she ran toward campus, heart pounding, she didn't see him watching her go with the expression of a man who had just set something in motion. Something life-changing. Something she was still too unaware to name. By morning, the rain had given way to a washed-out gray sky, the kind that made the world look newly scrubbed but still tired. Eastwood Avenue was drying, but her sneakers were not. They sat by the door of her tiny off-campus room, stiff with yesterday's storm, their soles thinned almost to nothing. The polished shoes were lined up beside them like they didn't belong in the same reality. Leah Dawson sat on the edge of her narrow bed, fingers resting on the leather. She could still hear her own voice from last night echoing in her head. "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" She had only wanted a pen. Instead, a stranger, a man who carried himself like a CEO millionaire in that tailored suit, had given her his shoes and told her the shoes didn't carry her story. She did. She hadn't even asked his name. Now it was graduation day. The same poor girl who had whispered for a pen in the rain was about to walk toward the campus hall in borrowed shoes that looked like they cost more than her entire wardrobe. She slid her feet into them again. They still felt warm, even though she hadn't worn them since sprinting from Eastwood Avenue to the exam hall. She'd made it in time, heart racing, hair soaked, clutching a cheap plastic pen the proctor had handed her at the door. The pen had gotten her through the final exam. The shoes had gotten her through the door. As she stepped outside, the cool morning air wrapped around her. Her thin jacket was zipped up to her chin, and her gown hung over her arm, its fabric wrinkled from being folded all night. She walked slowly at first, like she wasn't used to the weight of something nice on her feet. Every click of the shoes on the sidewalk felt unfamiliar. With each step toward campus, memories came in waves. 4 years of grinding poverty. 4 years of late nights in the library, with borrowed textbooks, taking pictures of pages on her old phone because she couldn't afford to print. 4 years of eating noodles 3 nights in a row and pretending she wasn't hungry when group projects ordered pizza she couldn't help pay for. She remembered studying in the corner of the library near the radiator, because that was the warmest spot in winter. Remembered nodding off over open books, waking up with pen marks on her face. Remembered bringing her own instant coffee mix and asking for hot water from the cafe like she was doing them a favor. She remembered feeling alone even when surrounded by classmates. They had study groups and brunch plans and parents who sent money. She had a mom who sent love and apologies from a tiny apartment 2 bus rides away. Her message is always the same. "I'm proud of you. Don't stop now. The world won't wait for you, baby. You run toward it." Leah adjusted the strap of her bag and kept walking. By the time she reached the campus gates, students were already crowding around. Gowns, flowing, caps pinned to perfectly styled hair. Parents took pictures. Someone laughed loudly. Someone else cried into their mother's shoulder. The air buzzed with accomplishment and unspoken fear about what came next. Leah slowed, suddenly hyper-aware of the contrast. Her gown was second-hand, altered by a neighbor for free. Her dress underneath was simple, 2 sizes too big, cinched with a thrift store belt. Her hair was pulled back in a plain bun. She felt like a poor girl who'd wandered into someone else's moment by mistake. Then she looked down at her feet. The shoes gleamed against the concrete, polished, powerful, like they weren't just leather but proof that, somehow, she had a right to be here. She took a breath and stepped through the crowd. As she moved toward the graduation hall, shoulders brushing others, she felt eyes catch on the shoes, slide up to her face, then away. Not in judgment this time, more like curiosity. "Leah?" a voice called. She turned. Dr. Harper, her academic advisor, stood near the entrance, holding a clipboard. Mid-40s, glasses, calm eyes that had seen Leah's transcript more times than anyone else. She'd been the one to approve Leah's overloads, to sign off on her work-study waivers, to send curt but kind emails that always ended with "keep going." "Morning, Dr. Harper," Leah said, trying to sound steady. Dr. Harper's gaze traveled slowly from Leah's face to her shoes, then back up again. "You clean up well," she said softly. "Those are impressive." "They're borrowed," Leah admitted, heat rising to her cheeks. "Plenty of things in life are borrowed," Dr. Harper replied. "Doesn't make them any less real while you're using them." The words settled into Leah's chest. "You've come far, Leah," Dr. Harper added after a beat. "Farther than most. Don't let what you don't have convince you that you don't belong here." For a second, Leah couldn't speak. The poor girl who'd asked, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" still lived inside her, still feared being exposed. But here was someone who'd watched her struggle through 4 years and still believed she belonged. "Thank you," Leah murmured, her throat tight. Dr. Harper touched her arm briefly. "Get inside. They're lining up by rows." "And Leah?" "Yes?" Whatever you think this day means, it's only a chapter, not the whole book. Inside the hall, the noise swelled chatter, footsteps, the rustling of gowns, rows of chairs stretched toward the stage, where university banners hung in deep blue and gold. Lights shone down, catching the shimmer of fabrics and the shine on polished shoes. Laya found her row, clutching her cap in one hand, diploma folder placeholder in the other. Her heart thumped so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The poor girl among polished classmates. The poor girl in borrowed shoes. The poor girl who had asked a stranger, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" and somehow gotten more than a pen, more than she'd understood. As the speeches began, her mind drifted, not away from the moment, but deeper into it. What if she'd never approached him? What if she'd let shame win and walked past, head down, soaked sneakers slapping the pavement? What if the CEO millionaire in the tailored suit had remained just another untouchable man on a busy street? The thought made her chest tighten. The names started to be called. Applause rose and fell like waves. Someone cried when their name echoed through the speakers. Someone tripped going up the stairs. The hall reacted with laughter and warmth. Laya's hands felt damp. She looked around, almost on instinct, and then she saw him. In the audience, 3 rows from the front, sitting with the quiet command of someone who didn't need to prove he belonged there. No cap, no gown, just another impeccably tailored suit. His posture straight, his expression calm. The stranger from Eastwood Avenue. Her breath froze. He wasn't looking at his phone like some parents were. He wasn't chatting with the person beside him. He sat still, attentive, scanning the stage, then the rows of students. Her row. Her pulse roared in her ears. He didn't smile. Not yet, but there was recognition in his eyes. A faint narrowing, a subtle softening, like he'd expected to see her here, in this exact place, in those exact borrowed shoes. Row 14. Please stand, the marshal called. Her knees wobbled as she rose with her group and moved slowly toward the aisle. Her name crept closer in alphabetical order. Darius Cole. Dawkins Jenna. Dawson. Laya. The floor beneath her felt both solid and unreal. She walked up the steps to the stage, the lights washing over her, the shoes carrying her forward. As she crossed the stage, she reached out and accepted the diploma cover from the dean's hand. It was light, almost too light for what it represented. She turned, as instructed, to face the audience for a moment. Her eyes, almost against her will, went searching. He was there, the CEO millionaire she'd once seen only as a stranger on a rainy street. His gaze met hers across the crowded hall. This time, he did smile, not broadly, just a faint curve of his lips, a subtle nod, as if acknowledging not just the degree, but the path she'd taken to reach this day. The worn sneakers, the empty wallet, the pen she'd begged for, the courage it took for a poor girl to ask for anything at all. The applause blurred around her. For a heartbeat, it felt like the only 2 people in the room were them. The poor girl in borrowed shoes, and the powerful man who'd placed them in front of her without explanation. She stepped off the stage, the moment lodged somewhere deep in her chest. Who was he really? Why had he come? And what, exactly, did that quiet nod mean? The sun finally broke through, the gray as the ceremony ended, casting gold light over the campus like the sky had decided graduation deserved a bit of mercy. Students poured out of the hall in waves, hugging, crying, shouting, posing for pictures with caps crooked and gowns tangled. Laya drifted with the crowd. Diploma cover clutched to her chest like it might vanish if she loosened her grip. The polished shoes clicked against the stone walkway, carrying her away from the noise until the echo of the fountain pulled her aside. The campus fountain sat at the center of the courtyard, water spilling over the edges in soft, steady sheets. Balloons bobbed in the air nearby. Parents lifted phones, and clusters of graduates laughed around her. It all felt distant, like she was watching someone else's movie. She stepped closer to the fountain and sank onto the cool stone edge, gown pooling around her. For the first time since they called, Dawson, Laya. She let herself breathe. This was it. 4 years. Finished. She looked down at her shoes again, their leather catching the sunlight. The contrast between these and her ruined sneakers back at her room made her chest ache. The poor girl who'd stuttered, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" felt like a different person and the same person all at once. "You did well." The voice came from her right. Calm, certain, familiar. She turned. He was there. No crowd around him, no fanfare. Just the same quiet, controlled presence he'd carried on Eastwood Avenue. The tailored suit, perfectly pressed. The watch that probably cost more than her mother's yearly income. The eyes that saw more than she was comfortable with. Up close without rain between them. He looked younger than she'd thought, maybe late 30s, early 40s. but there was something in his face that said he'd already lived several lives. "You came," she said, more breath than words. "I told you to go," he replied. "I wanted to see if you go, would make it." "You gave me your shoes," she said, as if that explained everything and nothing at all. "I gave you a push," he corrected. His gaze brushed over her gown, the diploma cover in her grip. "Most people would have given up in your position, you know. No money, no support, no pen for your final exam. Most would have taken the rain as a sign to stop. I didn't have a choice," she muttered. "I've never had the luxury of stopping." "That's exactly what I mean." He watched the fountain for a moment, hands in his pockets. Students laughed nearby. Cameras clicked. Someone popped confetti. "You asked a stranger on a dark street, 'Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?' And in that moment, you showed more than desperation. You showed courage." She scoffed softly. It didn't feel like courage. It felt like humiliation. "Courage and humiliation often walk the same road," he said, "especially for poor girls who refuse to give up." Her eyes snapped to his at that. The way he said poor girl didn't sting. It sounded factual, observant, like a diagnosis, not an insult. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "You don't even know me." He finally turned fully to her. "You're wrong. I know enough." He let that sit between them without explaining. It made her uneasy and curious all at once. "I'm no one," she said. "Just another broke graduate trying to figure out how to pay off loans and keep the lights on." "You're someone who showed up," he countered. "Someone who ran through a storm for a final exam instead of quitting. Someone who didn't let shame stop her from asking a question that could change everything. 'Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?' Most people are too proud to ask for help. You weren't." She looked away, focusing on the water splashing against stone. "You still haven't told me why you care." He let out a slow breath, then shifted, closer, lowering his voice like he was drawing a circle around just the two of them. "Sometimes," he said, "the smallest gesture is the first step into a bigger life. A borrowed pen, a pair of shoes, a stranger who doesn't look away." Her heart tapped faster. "What bigger life?" she whispered. He studied her, eyes tracing her face like he was weighing something heavy. "One where you're not forever apologizing for existing. One where your story isn't defined by worn-out sneakers and overdue rent. One where the poor girl who asked, 'Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?' starts asking much bigger questions." She swallowed, hope pressed against fear in her chest, each fighting for space. "And what if I'm not ready for that?" she asked. His gaze softened. "Nobody's ready. The question isn't readiness, it's willingness." He straightened slowly, the shift in his posture signaling something closing, something else opening. "So," he said, eyes holding hers, "do you want that life?" The world around them blurred. The fountain, the cheering, the cameras, all of it receded, until there was only his question hanging in the air. Heavy, charged. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know what that means," she admitted. "You will," he replied. "Soon." And just like that, he stepped back. "Enjoy your day, Leia," he said, using her name like they'd known each other longer than a few brief encounters in the storm and the crowd. "You've earned it." Before she could ask who he really was, what he wanted, how he knew her name, he turned and walked away, absorbed into the sea of families and graduates. She stayed by the fountain long after he disappeared. That night, her tiny apartment felt even smaller. The wallpaper peeled in the corner above the bed, revealing old plaster. The single lamp flickered, buzzing faintly. The smell of cheap coffee lingered from the morning, soaked into the worn fabric of the couch. Her gown hung from the back of the chair. Her diploma cover rested on the table, surrounded by unpaid bills and a half-finished instant noodle cup. The polished shoes sat by the door. She couldn't stop looking at them. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the rain on Eastwood Avenue, her voice shaking as she said, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" The way he'd crouched down, placed the shoes next to her destroyed sneakers, and said the shoes didn't carry her story, she did. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How was it? Send pictures when you can. I bragged about you all day at work. I love you. Keep going. The world won't wait for you, baby. You run toward it." Leia pressed the phone to her chest, eyes burning. Her mother didn't know about the man, or the shoes, or the strange, electric tension in that question. "Do you want that life?" She thought of all the years of cold rooms, of her mother, coming home with tired eyes and forced smiles, of counting coins for bus fare, of pretending she wasn't hungry when the fridge was nearly empty, of working late shifts, then studying until dawn. Her mother had taught her to fight for every inch, to never let help cost her who she was. Pride and survival braided together in one unbreakable rope. So why did it feel like saying yes to this unknown, bigger life might mean loosening that rope? She lay down, stared at the cracked ceiling, then sat up again. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind kept replaying his nod from the audience, his words by the fountain, his question that wouldn't stop echoing. Sometime past midnight, she got up and walked to the door. She touched the shoes lightly. They didn't feel like borrowed leather anymore. They felt like a test, like a key, like a line drawn across the floor of her life before and after. This is a real crossroads, she whispered into the empty room. The poor girl who'd stuck asked, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" Had stumbled into something much bigger than a test. She just didn't know yet what it would cost her, or what it might give back. Morning would bring answers she hadn't asked for yet, and with them, the next choice. The next day, campus felt like a different planet. The banners were still up, but they fluttered a little sadder without the roar of yesterday's crowd. Maintenance crews wheeled trash bins across the courtyard, picking up stray programs and deflated balloons. Parents were gone. Most students were packing, moving out, or taking last photos with dorm buildings before disappearing into whatever came next. Laya stood near the courtyard steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her gown folded away. Her dress simple but neatly pressed. The polished shoes were back on her feet, buffed with a napkin and a little cooking oil because she didn't own real polish. They still gleamed. She'd come back to campus to return them. That was the plan. Return the shoes. Say thank you. Walk away. Keep her story small and manageable, and hers. But the poor girl who'd once whispered, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" had already stepped over a line she couldn't uncross. She scanned the courtyard, half hoping, half dreading she wouldn't see him. He appeared like he'd simply stepped out of the air. No fanfare, no entourage. Just a steady figure cutting through the space with a quiet, unhurried stride. Same controlled posture, same tailored suit, same sense that the world rearranged itself slightly around him. This time, he was holding something. A small, formal-looking envelope. He stopped in front of her, eyes dropping briefly to the shoes, then back to her face. "You came back. I thought I should return these," she said, every word carefully measured. "They're not mine." His gaze was unreadable. "Not yet." He held out the envelope. Her stomach flipped. "What is that?" "An extension of our conversation," he said. "From the fountain. And from the night you asked, 'Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?'" Her chest tightened. I don't understand." "Open it," he said, his tone gentle but leaving no room for argument. Her fingers shook slightly as she slid her thumb under the seal and unfolded the thick, cream-colored card inside. The handwriting was elegant, the kind of script that belonged on old contracts and invitations to rooms she'd never imagined entering. "Miss Dawson," it read, "yesterday, I watched you cross a stage you fought very hard to reach. I saw the same determination I saw on Eastwood Avenue when you asked a stranger, 'Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?' Courage matters. So does perseverance. You have both. If you're willing to step into a bigger life, come to the address below tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring only yourself. A stranger who believes in what you carry." At the bottom was an address downtown and a clean, confident signature. Evan Mercer. Her eyes snagged on the name. She didn't recognize it, but something about the clarity of it, the way it owned space on the page, made her feel like she should. "What is this?" she asked, looking up. "An invitation," he said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." "To what?" His lips curved slightly. "To find out what, exactly, a poor girl who fought her way to graduation can do when the world stops underestimating her." "That sounds like a line," she muttered, half defensive, half terrified. "Maybe it is," he replied, "but it's also true." She searched his face for anything predatory, anything cruel. All she saw was patience, and something like expectation. "You don't have to come," he added. "You can toss that envelope in the nearest trash bin and go home. Nobody will know. Your life will go on. You'll find a job, struggle, survive. You're good at surviving." The way he said it made surviving feel like both a compliment and a sentence. "And if I do go?" she asked quietly. "Then we stop talking about surviving and start talking about building." His eyes held hers. "It's your choice, Laya. It always has been." He stepped back, nodded once, and then he was gone again, swallowed by the movement of families and carts and fading decorations, leaving the card burning in her hand like it was made of something far more volatile than paper. Back in her cramped kitchen that afternoon, she stood at the scarred counter and stared at the envelope as if it might rearrange its own words if she blinked too hard. The faucet dripped. The fridge hummed. A thin line of sunlight crawled across the table, catching the edges of unpaid bills and the corner of her diploma cover. Her mind slid backwards, Not just through the last few days, but through years. She saw herself at 8, wrapped in a too large coat, watching her mother scrub office floors at midnight, because the daytime job didn't cover rent. She remembered the way her mother's hands would ache, the way she'd soak them in hot water and salt, and still get up at 5 to make coffee and kiss Laya's forehead. "The world won't wait for you, baby," her mother used to say, breath fogging in the winter air as they walked to school because they couldn't afford a bus. "You run toward it, but don't let nobody own your run. You hear me? Help is fine. A chain is not." She remembered cold rooms where they'd kept coats on inside, remembered ramen noodles split in half, remembered her mother laughing anyway, playing music off an old phone, dancing in their tiny kitchen because if they didn't laugh, they'd drown. Now here she was, standing in a kitchen that smelled like burnt toast and coffee grounds, holding an invitation from a man she barely knew, a CEO Millionaire, if his clothes and quiet command meant anything for something bigger than anything she'd ever dared to picture. What if it was a setup? What if he wanted something from her? What if this bigger life came with invisible strings? And yet, what if this was her once-in-a-lifetime chance? He hadn't asked her to sign anything yet. He'd just asked her a question. Do you want that life? Then he'd followed it with this: a time, an address, a doorway. She stared at the shoes by the door. "I go on my terms," she whispered. "If I go, it's me choosing, not begging." Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out her best clothes, a clean blouse, dark jeans with no holes. She ironed them carefully, pressing her hands against the warm fabric. She combed back her hair, simple and neat. No pretending, no costume, just the best version of who she already was. Finally, she lifted the shoes. Using an old rag and a bit of oil, she polished them until they reflected her face back at her in small, warped fragments. Then she set them by the door like sentries. "If I go," she said to the empty room, "I walk in as myself." In the morning, downtown looked like another world. Glass and steel towers scraped the clear blue sky, their surfaces reflecting sun and power in equal measure. Cars hummed past. People in sharp clothes moved quickly, as if they had places to be where time itself was expensive. The address from the envelope led her to a sleek building with mirrored windows and a quiet revolving door. It looked cold from the outside, but as she stepped in, cool air and faint music wrapped around her. The lobby was all marble, gold accents, and soft lighting. She hesitated only a second before walking to the reception desk. "Can I help you?" the woman behind it asked, professional smile in place. I'm here to see Evan Mercer," Laya said, clutching the envelope like proof. 9 a.m. He invited me. The receptionist typed something, glanced at her screen, then looked up with a hint of something softer in her expression. "You're Miss Dawson?" "Yes. He's expecting you." The words landed like a shock. She turned toward the glass elevator, her reflection multiplying briefly as doors opened. Inside, the ride up felt endless. The city shrank beneath her feet as numbers climbed. 10, 18, 24, 30. Her heartbeat tracked each floor. By the time the doors slid open, her palms were damp. A hallway of frosted glass and quiet carpet led to a single office with floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city like he was studying a chessboard. When he turned, there was no surprise on his face, only acknowledgement. "Good morning, Laya," he said. "Welcome." She stepped inside, feeling small and exposed, yet oddly seen. "What is this place?" she asked. "My company headquarters," he replied. "Mercer Holdings. We build, buy, and back ideas. You're the CEO," she realized slowly. "And the majority shareholder," he added easily. "Which means I answer to a board, but not as much as they'd like." She tried to process that. The man who'd stood on a rainy street while she begged, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" was a CEO millionaire running an empire of glass and steel. "Why me?" she blurted out. "Why your shoes? Why the envelope? Why any of this?" He walked to his desk, tapped a few keys on his laptop, then turned the screen slightly toward her. Her name stared back from a file. Laya Dawson. Under it, grades, scholarships, work-study hours, volunteer projects. Her entire struggle laid out in neat lines and charts. Her breath hitched. "You've been watching me? Not in the way you're thinking," he said calmly. "I sit on a scholarship advisory panel. I read a lot of files. Most blur together. Yours didn't." He clicked through pages, photos of her tutoring underclassmen, notes from professors about her reliability, records of hours spent in the library and campus cafe working, nights. "You had the grades without the safety net," he continued. "No family money, no margin for error. Yet you still volunteered. still showed up. That caught my attention. And you decided to test me? She asked, a flare of defensiveness rising. With shoes? With a moment, he corrected. I wanted to see something I couldn't see on paper. How you handle desperation. Whether you'd ask for help or drown quietly. He met her eyes. On Eastwood Avenue, when you asked, "Can I borrow your pen for my final exam?" You gave me the answer. Her anger softened into something messier. So lending me your shoes was a test of willingness, he said, to see if you'd step into something you didn't feel you deserved yet. Most people would have refused out of pride. You didn't. You were scared, humiliated, but you still put them on and ran. He reached for a folder on his desk and placed it in front of her. This, he said, is the real offer. Inside, she found pages outlining a rotational program at Mercer Holdings, paid training, mentorship, and placements across departments, strategy, operations, community investment, stipend figures, housing support, a fast track not just to a job but to a career. This isn't charity, he said quietly. I don't do pity projects. I invest where potential meets perseverance. You've done the work alone for a long time, Leah. I'm offering to partner with you on the next part. Funding, guidance, access. In return, you show up, work, and grow. Not as my project, as my colleague in training. Her fingers shook slightly as she flipped through the pages. It was more than she'd ever dared to imagine in the nights she'd fallen asleep over textbooks. I don't know if I can do any of this, she whispered. Oh, you can, he said. The question is whether you believe you belong in rooms like this. Silence stretched. She thought of her mother's hands, raw from cleaning, of cold apartments, of counting coins, of the night rain soaked her sneakers, and she almost didn't ask for help, of borrowing a stranger's pen in her head long before she said it out loud, of the shoes by her door, waiting. A bigger life, he'd said. It didn't feel like winning the lottery. It felt like being handed a set of tools and someone saying, I'll teach you how to use them, if you're willing to sweat. She drew in a slow breath. If I say yes, she asked, I don't become your charity case, or some story you tell at fancy dinners about that poor girl who asked to borrow a pen. His gaze held hers steadily. If I wanted a story, I could have written one without you. I'm looking for partners, not props. Something in the way he said it loosened a knot inside her that had been there for years. She looked down at the folder again, then up at the skyline spreading out beyond the window. The city that had chewed her sneakers to pieces and still expected her to keep walking. Finally, she nodded. I'll do it, she said, voice low, but certain. I want that life, but I walk it as myself. A small, real smile tugged at his mouth. Good. That's the only way this works. He gestured to her shoes. For the record, those are yours now. Consider them a reminder. Of your generosity? She asked. Of your courage? He corrected. Shoes don't make you belong anywhere. You do that. Remember that the next time a room feels too big. Later, as she stepped out of the building onto the sidewalk, the city hit her with its usual chaos horns, voices, the low rumble of buses. Only now, it sounded less like a threat and more like possibility. She looked down at the shoes. They were the same ones that had stood in a puddle on Eastwood Avenue when she'd whispered, Can I borrow your pen for my final exam? The same ones that had carried her into an exam hall, across a graduation stage, to a fountain, through a sleepless night, into a glass tower where her name was on a file because someone believed it meant something. The pavement beneath them hadn't changed. The cracks, the stains, the gum darkened into the concrete all the same. But she wasn't the same poor girl anymore. The poor girl was still there. Yes, and always would be, but now she carried more than hunger and fear. She carried an offer, a path, a choice she'd made with her eyes open. As she walked down the street, the city looked familiar yet newly lit from within. The stranger from the rain was no longer just a stranger. The CEO Millionaire was no longer a distant figure in a suit. He was a mentor, an investor, a man who'd taken a simple question, Can I borrow your pen for my final exam? And turned it into the first line of a new chapter. The shoes weren't magic. They were leather and stitching and polish. The magic was everything it took for her to step into them, and everything she was now willing to walk toward. Under the clear sky, Leah Dawson lifted her chin, adjusted the strap of her bag, and kept going. The world wouldn't wait for her, but now, for the first time, she wasn't just chasing it. She was walking into it like she belonged.